the 18th century, exploration of Australia's vast interior was all the go. Explorers were heroic figures, the astronauts of their age. A lot of the brave explorers who crisscrossed this vast land are now justifiably famous here in Australia. But there's one man who opened up huge tracts of South Australia, including what's now its most successful wine-growing area. But that's not what made him famous at all. He's celebrated for something entirely different. He was the first man in history to be shot by his own camel. John Horrocks arrived in Australia on his 21st birthday, carrying a burning desire to make his mark on the colony. The young gent made a good fist of farming, but soon decided exploring was more to his nature. For that purpose, he imported Harry, the very first camel to arrive in Australia. Now, I know a lot of camels are really sweet-tempered, but Harry was a bit of a monster. The first thing he did was bite the head of the chief tent man called Garlic, and there were 2 huge gashes in Garlic's forehead and one down his cheek. Then Harry bit one of the goats, shook him by the scruff of its neck and apparently tried to eat it, and then finally he took a bite out of the flour bag. And of course that caused a great big trail of white all the way behind them and used up a lot of valuable supplies. Now, all that might sound like a bit of comedy, but then things got much darker. Horrocks, up ahead, saw a sweet little bird and thought, oh, this is going to look great for my stuffed bird collection. So he went to get his gun, and at that moment, Harry lurched or something, and the gun went off, and it went right through Horrocks' hand, knocking off all his right fingers, then through his cheek, and knocked all his teeth out. When he was shot, young Horrocks was just 3 days into his grand adventure. A week after that, he dictated what would be his final recorded words. They read, "It is with the greatest regret I have to inform the committee and my fellow colonists who subscribed towards the expenses of the expedition of its untimely and unfortunate termination." A very polite, dare I say typically British way of saying, I've been shot, so the trip's off. Horrocks contracted gangrene and died 23 days later. But before he passed away, he ordered that the camel should be shot. It took 2 bullets to kill Harry, and only after he'd managed to take one final bite out of a stockman's head. The vast interior of Australia was still a mystery when Horrocks' luck ran out. In fact, no European laid eyes on the red centre of Australia until more than 50 years after the British set up their little settlement in Sydney. The reason was these, the Blue Mountains. For decades, Sydney was landlocked. What lay beyond these rock escarpments was just speculation and guesswork. There was an insatiable demand for wool in the early 1800s. Anyone in the colony who could get wool to England's great textile mills was virtually guaranteed instant wealth. So the motivation to find more farming land was pretty strong. The mountains were finally crossed in 1813 by explorers who followed Aboriginal trails along the ridges. They were a hardy bunch, the early explorers, but some of them stood out. Thomas Mitchell arrived 15 years after the Blue Mountains were crossed. He believed all the good farming land had already been discovered. More than anything, he wanted to make his mark as an explorer and felt frustrated to be put on surveying duty. But ironically, it was his surveying skills that led him to finally achieve his goal. Apollo and I are going to give you a bit of a demonstration of surveying because Mitchell had this really curious way of working out how far he'd travelled during the course of the day. And he did it using these things, broad beans. He'd stick them in his pocket and then he'd count the steps that his horse made, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, till he got to 100. When he got to 100, he'd put a bean into his pocket, then he'd start again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, until he got to another 100, pop another bean into his pocket, and he reckoned that his horse took 950 steps to go 1 mile. So at the end of the day, if he'd got 100 beans in his pocket, then he knew that his horse had travelled about 10.5 miles. Now, that may not be as accurate as GPS, but quite frankly, Mitchell is the most famous surveyor in Australia, so who am I to argue? Who are you to argue either? Have some more beans. Doesn't want any more beans. Mitchell was asked to use his surveying skills to chart the Darling River in the west of New South Wales. But his ambition got the better of him. He saw there was much more promising land to the south of the Murray River and decided to set off into uncharted territory. And he hit the jackpot, open pasture land as far as the eye could see. He called it Australia Felix, lucky Australia. And it was lucky for him too. As one of the very few explorers to discover rich pasture land, Mitchell's place in Australian history was assured. Mitchell and his team had crossed mountains, navigated rivers and slept rough in the bush. By the time they got to Portland on the south coast of Victoria, they'd been on the move for 5 months. They were miles away from civilization in previously uncharted territory. Except, actually, they weren't. Imagine Mitchell's surprise. He'd stumbled onto an established settlement that no one else in the colony knew existed. A farming family from West Sussex called the Hentys had slipped through the back door with a land grant from the King of England.
Tony, hi, come on in.
Thank you. How long had the Hentys been in Australia?
They'd been in Portland for 18 months before Major Mitchell arrived. So they had their huts built and their veggie garden and their trees and they had a very good establishment. They had their cattle, they had their horses, they had a lot of stock over here.
So what happened when Mitchell showed up at the Hentys' place?
Well, they thought they were bushrangers because they didn't know there was no white men for miles around.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden this white man was coming through the bush at them, with guns and feathers in their caps and all sorts of things, and they went, well, this must be a bushranger, so we'll load the gun.
So the meeting is on record?
Yes, it is. This is a document written by Edward Henty, and what he goes on to say is that the appearance of Major Mitchell and his band of 5 with emu feathers in their caps, as well as the red tail feathers of the black cockatoo, blue and red serge shirts, and much tattered, patched and worn, and certainly very fierce and formidable looking.
It just looked absolutely terrifying,
would have been horrible. An explanation and reconciliation followed. So that's when they went, oh, well, we won't shoot him yet, we'll find out what he's about. Mitchell arrived without anything because they'd run out of flour and all those sorts of things. So the Henty said, well, we've got a supply ship turning up in a day. We'll wait until that comes and then we can load you up. So they gave them flour and gin and whole heaps of grog and stuff. So they sent them off their way after about 3 or 4 days.
Now, Major Mitchell must have been grateful because he tipped off the Hentys about the fertile lands that he'd found to the north, and that helped make them rich. But when he got back to Sydney, he reported the presence of the squatter clan to his boss, the new Governor of New South Wales, and it didn't do well for the Hentys. So what did Governor Gibbs do?
Well, he set down a team, because he went right off the rocker, apparently. He went, oh, what's everybody, what are they doing down
there? Big landowners in my land.
What's happening? That damn king, what's he doing? I'm trying to run this show. So he set down a surveyor and stuff. And, of course, the Hentys had laid out their houses and their gardens and everything else. And just to really make the point to the Hentys, right, that Gibbs was actually the boss, they actually put a road right through Edward Henty's middle of his house.
You know what?
Which was very nice.
I think the Hentys would have been much better off if they'd shot Mitchell.
They were very British at that stage.
Actually, you're a Henty, aren't you? I think I'll just put that down and move to the other side of the room. When I first heard the story about Mitchell meeting the Henty brothers, I assumed that the Hentys were a pair of ragamuffins trading with whalers and making a hand-to-mouth living. I now realise that they were landowners, they were favoured by the King of England and were very, very respectable. Look, this is Francis Henty's own top hat. I better give it back before I go.